means a place of gathering, which I think is a really fitting connection for tonight's event. So tonight, you're all attending a panel discussion on community connections through digital technologies. And I'd like to introduce tonight's discussion before I introduce the panel. So today, youth from across the world use digital technologies, such as mobile phones, social media, to keep connected to their friends, family, and the rest of their world. The use of these technologies, or these tools, has dramatically shifted the way people communicate over the last few years, with many children communicating in a way that their elders do not even understand, let alone monitor. For better or worse, these tools are now used to keep communities connected and have the potential to decrease feelings of isolation when individuals relocate away from their loved ones and their culture, and enable the communities to access those who moved away. Ideally, technologies would keep these communities strong. However, these tools also provide an avenue into communities for a way of living that traditionally would not be acceptable. With the implementation of the National Broadband Network and its ability to provide a greater access to increased amounts of information, it is time to consider the effect of the world on community culture and values, and the possibility of cultural knowledge slipping out to those who should not be privy to it. Tonight we're going to have a panel discussion, and there's going to be plenty of time for questions. So please allow me to introduce our panel members. Our first panellist to my right is Ms. Susan Beatson. And Susan is I was going to say it wrong. How do I pronounce it? Ngima woman, who's also Wiradjuri descent. Brewarrina is her home, where she was raised amongst her father's people, on Ngima country in remote northwest New South Wales. Susan now lives in Brisbane with her husband. She has a Bachelor of Information Technology degree in Data Communications and Information Systems, a Bachelor of Information Technology honours degree, and I'm proudly to say first-class honours, both from QUT. Her employment, not the QUT bit, the first-class honours. We don't care about the QUT. Her employment experience extends over 18 years to both information technology management, IT project management, and more recently, lecturing and tutoring in information sciences and Indigenous studies. Susan is completing her PhD researching in the area of community informatics, specifically communities of practice within social media. Her research explores deliberate cultural and social connections within social media that synthesise knowledge and expertise and their relationship with everyday lived realities of co-located and relocated people to community. This research, which is community-owned and led, realises both immediate and long-term benefits and outcomes directly related to community as determined by community. While her PhD studies are full-time, Susan is actively involved in her home community through her family, and particularly in her ongoing work with community elders and senior women to strengthen whole-of-community access and availability of computers, technology and infrastructure, including procurement and education. Susan. And please allow me to introduce our second speaker tonight, Tom Mosby. Tom's a Torres Strait Islanders descent from Ayama, Tudu, Masig, Meriam, Dua and Arab Islanders. Currently, Tom is the Executive Manager, Indigenous Research and Projects at the State Library of Queensland. He holds a Bachelor of Applied Science in Art Conservation from the University of Canberra and a Bachelor of Laws from the University of Melbourne. With over 9 years legal practice experience, most recently a Senior Associate with Clayton Utz Lawyers in Melbourne, Tom's work experience also include a prior incarnation as a conservator and curatorial art consultant in Australia and internationally. He was the curator of the landmark exhibition Island Passan Art of the Torres Strait Islands at Cairns Regional Art Gallery in 1988, and was instrumental in developing and steering the Torres Strait Islands, a celebration, an unprecedented collaboration between Queensland's leading South Bank precinct cultural agencies launched this year on July 1. Tom is also the curatorial lead for Straight Home, the State Library's contribution to the collaboration. Tom has published nationally and internationally with a focus on art of the Torres Strait Islands, conservation and moral and legal rights. Tom is currently leading the development of the Kurral Dargan Indigenous Knowledge Centre at the State Library of Queensland as the digital and new technology showcase and flagship for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander engagement as partners and clients. And please allow me to introduce Professor Simon Kaplan. Professor Kaplan is Director of NICTA's Queensland Research Library. Prior to taking up this role, Simon was Professor of Computer Science and Executive Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology at Queensland University of Technology. And before, he was Head of School of Information Technology and Electrical Engineering at the University of Queensland. He has over 25 years of industry and research experience in information technology, in particular engineering of large-scale evolving systems, supporting distributed systems, programming languages and human-computer interaction. So let's begin tonight's panel discussion. Susan, I'd like to ask you a question. I'll lead the questions. Do you see social media as sustaining our communities? So I'm going to invite you up to the lectern.
Hi everyone. I'd like to follow Anita and acknowledge, honour and respect the Jagera people as custodians of this country. I'm just going to mention some of the things we're doing in our community using social media, including Facebook, DivaChat, YouTube, Skype and Google Cloud to connect up local and relocated community members as a way of growing capability within community business initiatives. And with advancing technologies being more portable and part of our everyday use, we know we can be on the riverbanks fishing or caring for the river systems and still connect up with mob. So if this is part of our everyday reality within community, we're gaining an understanding of the modes, types and frequency of use and availability and access to technology and infrastructure, including what applications such as Facebook, whether it's MySpace, Bebo or DivaChat, which hardware, whether it's a phone or computer, or whose computer, whether it's the home or school or business, and what networks, whether it's broadband, satellite, wireless or mobile, and how all of these affects our everyday use of social media. So we're doing this through various projects, and I'll draw on a common theme of connecting up through social media. The first is a pilot with 10 EXO laptops gifted by one laptop per child, which saw children learning alongside their mothers and elders to create digital stories. The portability of the EXO laptops enabled this on-country at various cultural sites. Then through a closed-loop social media tool connecting the laptops without internet, children connected up specifically to yarn and share stories about their project between peers. Digital content pulled together using computer programming skills, modular programming using Scratch. We think it's important for our primary age children to learn the benefits of social media when targeted at connecting up, specifically for skills development and learning. The second project is an after-school homework and adult learning centre, which we're about to start up after negotiations with Aboriginal teachers from out home, incorporating connecting up with each of other and relocated mob. We'll create Facebook pages for study groups to share information in a peer learning environment, and also to source how-to videos from YouTube for specific tasks using principles of safe internet use, which we've developed on country. The third is working with senior community members, using Facebook and Google Plus to create virtual communities targeted for specific work or skills-related needs, also known as communities of practice in the academic arena. A bit like in our homework centre where students set up groups or study group pages, Google Plus or Facebook is used to create groups for work-related and project-oriented tasks, sharing information in Google Docs and connecting up face-to-face in Google Plus or through Skype instead of the standard fax or facsimile or phone. The aim of this project in particular is to increase skills of local community members or to source additional skills through our social media connections. For example, for a relocated mob, we all know that our children who move away from country to be educated don't necessarily return. So we hope that this may redress some of the resource drain. And importantly, we're learning from each other, not only through the formal institutions. We're paying our own mobs for consulting rather than sourcing from anywhere, while building in continual learning and skills development, creating economic opportunities and economic independence for our own people. These initiatives revealed value in the new ways of connecting up and helped us understand transferable and sustainable practices within social media for lifelong learning relevant to our everyday. And because of the cross-platform capability of these social media tools, the learned skills are transferable for all children, youth and senior community members, from computers to laptops to tablets and to mobile phones. Perhaps soon, lessons and after-school homework centres will be conducted virtually on mobile phones. Thank you.
So, Tom, I have a question for you. How is the State Library enabling the recording and passing down of our culture and our knowledges? Can you tell us a little bit what you're doing?
Sure. I actually think, to start, one of the big challenges that we actually face here at the State Library, but I think generally in Queensland, is the fact that we're such a dispersed population and that we have some of the most remote communities, Indigenous communities in Australia, in the Cape York and up into the Torres Strait. I was actually last weekend up in Cooktown, and for the first time I went to Hopevale, and it was this sort of weird going from an urban setting into basically this remote community where you actually have real issues with broadband capacity, real issues in relation to people actually accessing signals so that they can actually use mobile telephones to be able to get onto the internet. And so you have this really dispersed population, and even things like, this slide behind me is a young lady on Boigu, which is one of the most northern islands where we have our Indigenous knowledge centres. And as part of the State Library, we actually support about 21 Indigenous knowledge centres throughout Queensland, especially the Cape York and the Torres Strait. And this knowledge centre on Boigu, when you actually fly into that island, you actually fly over Papua New Guinea. It's actually closer to Papua New Guinea than it is to the Australian mainland. And so you can really appreciate that sort of distance in terms of what we're trying to do down here with these communities up north. I think because of that, the use of new technology becomes really important because of the distance, and because that is really one of the very few ways that people can actually keep in touch with people down on the mainland. Looking at sort of technology such as Skyping, I have an aunt up in the Torres Strait who knows how to Skype. She's well conversant with something like that. I actually don't know how to Skype. There are people that can actually go on Facebook or have Facebook pages. And it basically comes out of this sort of real necessity for people to actually be able to communicate. So in terms of the State Library, what we actually tend to do is we go into these communities. Like I said, we partner with the local Indigenous councils. We set up these Indigenous knowledge centres, and we put in the sort of computer facilities and encourage people to actually use computers to do things like get online and do their online banking, be able to Skype, and be able to actually send emails, and just basically getting people comfortable with the use of computers and the internet, because the long-term ambition being, once people actually get comfortable, they can start recording their own stories, their own knowledge, they can actually start their own collections and conservation of their own sort of cultural knowledge in these communities, and use social media as a way to actually capture all that and to actually connect with other people. And I think that's one of the great things in terms of the library, where it's leading the sort of innovation in terms of Indigenous people taking control of capturing all of that sort of cultural content themselves. hope I made sense.
Yeah. I've got a question, but I'll have to wait till the end, I think.
Yep.
So, Simon, where does Nectar fit into all of this?
I don't know.
Oh, I know, you work there.
Okay, so I did think of a few things to say to help set this off, and I'm not entirely sure if they fit in exactly, but we'll see how we go. I guess I'm very interested in cultures and what makes a culture and how cultures work. And increasingly I'm of the view that culture it's a kind of ecosystem in the same way that, a group of plants are a kind of ecosystem. There's been some fantastic stuff written about this by people like Daniel Dennett on how you can view all sorts of interesting aspects of the world from an evolutionary perspective. So if you think of a culture as being an ecosystem, what you're saying is that it's self-organizing and evolving and network and time-shared, where time-shared means different parts of it can change at different rates, which is probably why we still have Tony Abbott in the Parliament, I suppose. But it's an interesting way of thinking about the world, and you suddenly start looking at everything around you and thinking about why is our society like it is? Why does it self-organize in the way that it does? What parts of it can we consciously change? And this is the bit where what sounded like an irrelevant ramble starts to tie into what we've been talking about here, because technology is a change agent. And so when you go out into a community and you start providing it with technology, whether that's entirely spontaneous and accidental, or whether it's a deliberate activity, and you can see both kinds of this, right? You know, any community is going to start using mobile phones and laptops and all this other kind of really probably quite good stuff. But they're also going to have do-gooders come in and say, here's a whole one laptop per child program, which sounds very nice until you realize there's an entire political ideology that goes along with that, which is, I suspect, a lot more questionable than the technology itself. And so you start saying, what is the impact of this going to be? And if you don't understand the culture in the sense of how is it shaping itself, you don't get to answer that question properly. So Nectar has actually been worrying about that question a lot, because we're in the business of driving advanced technology. The whole world's obsessing about the NBN, and as far as I can tell, the intellectual level of the NBN conversation is about what I expect to find at the raceway out in Ipswich during the Winter Nationals. You know, it's all revhead stuff. How fast will it be? This is almost certainly the most irrelevant question you could possibly ask about the NBN. What's far more interesting, of course, is to ask the difficult question of what kind of transformative impact is this damn thing going to have? And that's where you find that there's just a desert, right? Nobody is saying anything interesting about how the NBN can be a change agent for Australia. So we've been thinking a lot about what that means and thinking about what it means for people and organizations to become more adaptive. Because if the NBN means one thing, it's going to mean change. So if you're not adaptive, you're not going to deal well with change. So we might not know what the change is, but let's at least deal with the question of how do you become more ready to cope with it from both a cultural and a technological point of view. And we think it's really about three things in the end. How well can you perceive what's going on around you? How well can you act based on that? And how well can you learn based on how you've perceived and acted? And we have this metaphor now around atlases and playbooks. An atlas is a tool that helps you to wayfind. Now, after a flood map is literally an atlas. But when you go into a library, you're experiencing a far more abstract information space. And we knew how to navigate that very well 20 years ago with the Dewey Decimal System. And in reality, we don't know how to navigate it very well now. We're still learning that. And there's also this really important idea of the commons, a space where people come together, which used to be physical, and now it's digital. Facebook and Twitter and so on are the first gropings towards that kind of thing. Woody here worked at Amazon, and Amazon's a marvelous example of a company that's exploring this. Amazon's very interesting because of the way it creates commonses from, you do things and you act as an individual, and then you come back and it tells you all the stuff about what other people have done, some of which is really useful and interesting, and as a result I waste far more money on books than I should, which is very good for Jeff Bezos. So we're talking about digital citizens and the ways that technology can help them to wayfind, to try and decide how to act and to understand what other people are doing. And I think the projects that we've been talking about earlier are examples of taking particular situations and trying to work out how the technology and the people can fit together best. So to wrap up, and I will wrap up, culture is terribly important in this. If we're not careful, we're going to have this massive Americanization where we all just converge onto a single culture. And that would be very bad. Because I think if we had a single culture, it would be more likely to be Coogee than Venice. And I don't want to live in a sort of society that does the Coogee thing, which I presume you all know what I'm talking about. So how do we manage convergence and divergence of culture in the correct way? And how do we use all of this technology to sort of drive the good parts of what we have as Australians, as a society forward, and both help and keep the good at the same time. And the State Library is really important, I think. And I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Hopefully I've said enough that I don't have to talk again at all.
You know I'm going to ask questions.
You know how unlikely that is, don't you?
Tom.
Yeah, I was going to say, so when you actually say managing the sort of convergence and divergence, and you talk about sort of managing, it's interesting from my perspective because as a taking off my sort of State Library employee hat and putting on the sort of Indigenous living and community hat and seeing how people are already in that space, using technology, using mobile phones to actually, and flip cameras, putting things up on the internet. I suppose what I'm trying to sort of get a sense of in terms of your thinking is how does that, when you talk about sort of managing, is it a matter of managing that where people are already doing things?
Yeah. That's a really good question, and it just shows how careful one has to be with words, because when I was talking about managing culture, what I actually meant was not managing culture, if you see what I mean. If you think of this as an ecosystem, it's effectively self-managing. But then you get a Channel 9 coming along or a Channel 7. If you think of TV as a metaphor for this, and you look at, 50 years of commercial television in Australia, there is a continuous attempt to try and make all of us conform to a set of norms that go along with that. And that's a very, very bad thing. What you want to do is actually allow communities to... So that the balance you're after is how do you build technologies that allow communities to maintain their own culture the way they want to, when all the people who want to pay for the technology want to do exactly the opposite. So if we come back to one laptop per child, there is a particular approach to pedagogy that goes along with that. Now, the project is turning out to be really quite unsuccessful, and I talk to some of the people who've actually put the money into this, and they say, as far as they can tell, there are enormous numbers of ALPC computers sitting in cupboards all over the North End. And it's because the people who've distributed the technology are absolutely insistent that a particular American pedagogical model get used or else. And faced with that choice, a lot of people are saying, well, I don't really want to use the damn thing that much.
Well, that's not necessarily the case. In fact, for us, I took 10 laptops that were gifted to us. I met one laptop per child at a conference in Canberra, and he was, one of the fellows there was saying that they found it really difficult to get into, was the term he used, remote communities. So I said, well, what are you doing with the XOs, the laptops? And he said, well, we have some, why? And I said, well, I'll take some, if I can just take them. And there was some... there needed to be an arrangement and understanding that we were gifted the laptops, and that's why I mentioned when I spoke earlier that we were gifted the laptops, we took them, and we actually sat with a group of women, in fact, elders and senior women in the community, and we worked out a way that we wanted to use this technology and how it would work for us. And we've developed a framework that not only enables the children to learn in what we consider to be a culturally relevant environment, it provides for economic independence for individuals. Mothers who had young children that didn't necessarily have any ideas about a career path are now hoping, to continue as teachers, and our Aboriginal teachers with the school are actually looking at investing their time, and our elders are being paid for their knowledge. And it's a much bigger program than that. The mothers are learning because we need to feed the children at the time when we get together. We're learning to eat healthily and prepare food healthily and what foods to prepare, and even to the extent where one of the children who actually attends school regularly, and Brewarrina is a school that has a health arrangement where children have their eyes tested. This child was diagnosed with ADD, or disruptive disorder, and I put my glasses on him because I found he was being a little bit out of sorts in the class, well, in the lessons. So I put my glasses on him, and the next, within 2 months he had glasses and was excelling. But the other really important thing that happened with what we did with the laptops, one child who was covered in mud, we were on the riverbank learning, and covered in mud, and was just snooping around and came up to us in about week 4 of a 12-week program, and he just joined us. We got an extra laptop for him, and he excelled as, doing this object-oriented or modular programming, creating digital stories. So we did it our way, from the ground up.
And I guess that's what I'm arguing for, is that is the best way to do it.
But in fact, sorry.
No, go ahead.
But in fact, perhaps with Android technology and smartphones, perhaps it's smartphones or tablets that we should be using, because all of the same facilities that are on these XO laptops are available, except maybe, certainly for mobile phones, and that's what everybody has, so it's not any technology we need to get. It's just downloading the applications to do the different things, and we can still all do it, which is, I think, where we're going.
Look, this is a great story, and I think that if this was more of the model, we'd be getting a lot more benefit out of this. I think that it's easy to get caught in the question of the actual technology. Should we be using Android or iPads and this and that? But in some ways, that's camouflage, right? The point is, it doesn't matter whether a community has access to iPhones or Android phones or XO laptops. The key thing is they need to be shaping how they use it. So 2 quick anecdotes to illustrate this. One that involves the State Library. There is a very interesting person named Mervyn Jarman. Mervyn is a Jamaican guy who started doing projects in the slums of Jamaica, which are a particularly unpleasant part of the world, trying to keep kids engaged in basically not joining gangs and getting into crack and all that stuff. And he's most famous for a project called iStreets, which took shipping containers, built digital media labs in the shipping containers, and used those to create kind of hubs that would draw the kids into the technology. And the kids would then shape how they used the technology. It was all digital videos and movies and things like, oral histories of their grandmother and so on. But he's here at the moment in Australia, and I was talking to him a couple of months ago. I think Naomi might have been in the discussion, and he said one of the things he's most proud of is one of those kids who came through one of the first programs that he ran is now the principal of his own school. And that's incredible, to have that degree of transformation, not only on one person's life, but then all the other lives that have been transferred as a result. But when you look at how the programs work, Mervyn goes and embeds himself in the community. The community has to own it and shape it the way they want to. The other story is about Sugata Mitra, and you should check out his TED Talks, an Indian guy who's delivered technology into communities in India and basically said, work out how to use it for yourselves. And just amazing stories of coming back a few months later and the transformation that the children have had on the entire community. But all of these things work because the community owns the direction. Right? They might not own the technology. I don't know who ends up owning the technology, but they own the way it's used and the benefit that they want to get out of it. That, I think, is really the key thing to look for if you want a community to engage with this stuff in a way that makes sense for them.
I think, in terms of State Library, that is really very much core to the work we actually do into communities in terms of that, looking at sustainability and ensuring that whatever we do, that it is long-term, that it is sustainable. And so when we actually look at partnering with people, I mean, it's been a very interesting, and it's interesting talking about one laptop per child, and Susan and I had a sort of email conversation yesterday about this, where it was about I suppose corporates and foundations coming in and wanting to actually engage with Indigenous communities, and at the moment this thing of Indigenous and especially remote communities is very sexy. I mean, it's great for that sort of photo opportunity in these communities, and you stick it into your sort of annual report and you've done your sort of stuff. And you've been in there and you've given money or you've given equipment. But where things fall down is you don't have that sort of ongoing, sustained engagement. And the one thing the State Library is very keen on is to ensure that there is that ongoing, sustained engagement when we actually look at working with sort of foundations and partners. And I suppose the project in terms of the Mervyn Jarman thing is really about that ensuring sustainability, that it's embedded in the community, that the community actually owns the technology and the use of that technology as well.
And I find it's not just the technology. For me, it's about the people, and it's about training our people. So if we're going to bring technology into a community or develop systems for community, it's what we need to do is we need to make sure from the ground up our people are able to deal with this. We have, my community in Brewarrina, very few computers are in homes. In fact, they're just non-existent. And so bringing these, just these 10 laptops, the children were able to take them home. In fact, with the school, they're not allowed to take the computers home, where in any other school with non-Indigenous students, they're actually allowed to take them home. So because there are no computers in the homes, people don't know how to fix them or don't know what it is they're buying. And we have people going around to remote communities organising for people to buy a laptop that costs $900 here if you buy it at Harvey Norman, but ends up costing them $5,000 through some sort of financial arrangement which actually draws the money out of their Centrelink payments every fortnight. So there might also be somebody in community who can fix a computer, but someone who will charge $150 to convert a digital video transfer a digital copy, a digital video onto a DVD, which it just doesn't make sense. So what we need to do is we need to actually train our people. If we're going to implement on community, if that's how you want to engage, then you need to start coming from the ground up. Everybody needs to really think about what it means from a social perspective and think ethically about how is this sustainable. It's not just the technology that's sustainable, it's the people need to be able to sustain the technology.
I think I might open up for questions now. Christy and Jess are going to have roving microphones, so if I just ask you to put your hands up. Oh, okay. Can I ask mine first? I'm dying to ask.
Yeah, sorry,
Right.
Can I just say, please wait till you get a mic before you ask the question, because otherwise it doesn't end up on the recording. Give us some hands.
You're first.
The gentleman in the front row of relative. Well, in my introduction, I talked about where is it? Yeah, information. The national broadband and access to Skype and recording and things like that. Enabling our culture. So this is a question to Tom and to Susan. Our culture being recorded, and my biggest fear is that stuff that I'm not privy to as an Aboriginal woman, I may come across. What do you think about that? How can we prevent that our stories that are only for women or for men getting out there? How do we stop that?
If you don't mind, Susan, even if you, in terms of what we're doing here at the State Library, the training that we are putting into communities, it is to actually ensure that they're the ones recording, that they're the ones putting up and putting out into that sort of public domain the material that they want the public to see. So it's actually for these Indigenous communities to actually take control of their own sort of content and ensuring that the content is protected. And so it's very much a key to the sort of work that we do.
Great, thank you.
And I think that every Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander community is different, and everyone has their different ways of doing things. So it is relevant to each individual community, and that's where we are developing frameworks and safe internet use and what's appropriate to share, especially using social media technologies. It's what's appropriate, what should you be sharing? And that's why we're starting from primary age children right the way through to elders and senior women and men. And they're the sorts of things that we're encouraging and learning.
Good. And I suppose the flip side as well is the great thing that I'm seeing is that Indigenous kids and people are actually themselves putting things out there and putting things up on YouTube. I think one of the great things that I actually find, usually on a Friday night, I'd like to sit down and go through sort of YouTube and see what kids from up in the Torres Strait have put up. And I think when you find, or what I've seen is where you actually find that things are sort of crossing into that boundary of content that shouldn't be shown, there is that self-regulation by other users of YouTube as well, which is quite an interesting sort of development.
Okay. I might just open up to the questions. When you ask a question, can I just ask you to introduce yourself and mention the panel member you'd like to direct your question at?
My name is Philip Browning. To Simon and broadly, I've got a comment. The comment is, no one's really defined what we mean by community in a deeper sense. We're using the word a lot, but I haven't heard anyone really get close to sort of describing what we mean by community. That's why we're here. Simon got closest with your conversation about culture, but we yet to really understand what we mean by community. Second is, a decade ago I ran a symposium which was sponsored by QUT, Queensland Government, NOE, range of big consulting houses around community and technology. And it's almost like a decade on with NBN, a decade earlier with, I guess, the internet, digital, fear of digital divide, etc. We kind of 10 years later we're still having the same issues, same conversation. And I raised this with a colleague from someone from QUT, who was actually on the Prime Minister's internet task force in the early 90s, and he said, yeah, well, go back a decade earlier again, and the same sort of conversations were happening. And I actually asked him, what does technology do, whether it be in 1991, 2001 or 2011, what does it enable us to do that's different than we've done before? And we teased it all out, and I challenged him to find, well, actually not much. It might do it. So I'm wanting to ask, in 2011, what is digital technology enabling us to do that we couldn't do before in a substantive fashion? I'd really like to challenge you to find what that might be.
Okay. Well, I'll have a few goes. I'll avoid the community question because we don't have the year that would take. It's a very good question, though, about what isn't community, and there's so many different ways to define it. I'm going to start in a really odd place. In about 1865, the Cape Times in Cape Town had a competition, and the competition was draw a picture of what Cape Town will look like in 1965. Or it might have been 1875, that sort of time period. And people put in all these paintings, and they got stuck in a cupboard in the back of the National Gallery and forgotten about. And in sometime in the early 1970s, they stumbled across this, and they thought, let's put it out there, What did people think the world would be like 100 years hence? And it was historical, right? Because there wasn't one big pier in the bay. There were hundreds of piers in the bay. And, the houses were more brightly coloured, but they were all only 3 stories high. And there were no cars. And I could go on, but you get the point, right? People always think the future will be a linear extrapolation of the present, and it never is. So we have the sense that we're never going anywhere, but we look back, and then suddenly we can realize that we are. And I think that in the 1980s and 1990s, when people were saying, there's this revolution and it's just around the corner, and it never happened, I think we're a lot closer to it now, and this panel is hitting the topic. At some level, nothing is changing because we live in villages and we communicate with people in those villages. And at another level, I think everything has changed because physical location and your engagement in those villages has been massively disintermediated. In the 1990s, this was a dream. And we said, this is going to happen, and then all these things will come as a result. Education will transform, health will transform, blah, blah, blah. What we're seeing now is that at a social level, this disintermediation, we're right in the middle of it. We've got a long way to go, and we don't really understand the consequences of it yet. But the technology hasn't really advanced far enough for that to start disintermediating our professional lives the way it does our personal lives. So, for example, health is still very localized. If I worked for a university, and I'm pleased to say I don't anymore, I would be terrified because we are somewhere in the 10 to 15 years away from a massive disintermediation of the whole tertiary education system. That's going to be ugly when it happens. Amazon is a nice example of a company that decided its strategic advantage was its IT systems. Borders decided its strategic advantage was the retail locations, the locations of its retail outlets. Oops. So we are transforming, and it's those kinds of things that point to it. But if you ask me what's going to happen in 10 years' time, it'll be just like now, except there'll be more houses and they'll be more brightly coloured. But I won't pick the lack of skyscrapers just like they didn't in 1870.
Melissa, next. Sorry, thank you.
Hi, my name is Lucy Cameron and I work with Department of Economic Development and Innovation. I'm really interested in the economic impacts of IT on communities, and Susan, you were saying that the maintenance is a big issue and there's an economic draw out of communities from the maintenance, but on the other hand, people are staying more in the communities because there's more education and training opportunities, and that connects them back with country and they don't need to leave and stay away. So I'm just wondering if there are any other observations regarding the economic impact of these technologies, and do you see it as being an overall benefit or not?
I do see technologies being a benefit, particularly from an economic perspective. What's actually happening through social media? Sorry, I'm trying to avoid that light. What's actually, so I can see your face. What's actually happening from an economic perspective within community and within when we're bringing in IT, like for instance the homework centres that we're developing and the frameworks that we're developing around how we want to use technology for our young children, it's actually providing individuals with jobs that they wouldn't necessarily have looked for or sought out. But it's also providing the social media context, or the connecting up, is providing individuals with professional development. So they're actually now able to source connections with other relocated members where they're learning how to do things and now have an opportunity to seek out their own professional development. So from an individual perspective, yes, there's definitely lots more economic opportunities. And we've got a young woman who has, she's the only person community, only Aboriginal person who has IT expertise, and she has a Cert 2 in IT. She's 20 years of age and not long ago had a heart attack, but she's fine. It was a minor heart attack, but let herself out of hospital to go along to a course that she was helping somebody run, an IT course. But we're hoping that through, this sort of thing, she'll be able to develop her career and hopefully, maybe be the IT person. But certainly things like, having her in town, learning and teaching her how to learn new ways of doing things, like looking up YouTube and finding out how to replace. So I'm on the phone talking to her or on Facebook actually, not on the phone at all, on Facebook talking to her about, if I send a hard drive out to you, can you replace it? Oh, I can give it a go. Okay, well, here's a link to YouTube, and, next time she'll source that herself, so she can actually replace it. So there was an opportunity for her as an individual to get a little bit of extra cash. So as for business, it's a long way off in terms of, but I think that, yes, there's... But kids, are uploading digital content. That's a massive industry, I think, in the future. So I think in terms of economic independence and economic opportunities for, people with their mobile phones and taking videos and telling stories and sharing culture and creating digital content, putting it up on YouTube, I think there's actually opportunity for, much bigger things in terms of digital media, yeah.
Simon just wanted to make a comment, and we'll take a question from the back. Yeah.
When the floods happened, you couldn't buy bananas in Townsville. And this wasn't because there weren't any bananas in Townsville. It was because they couldn't get the bananas in Townsville down to Brisbane, because bananas in Townsville are not actually edible until they've travelled to the Rockley markets and been turned from a wholesale good into a retail good and then shipped back to Townsville so they can be sold. And I am not kidding. Every single piece of fresh produce in Queensland, in fact, many of the pieces of fresh produce across Australia, have to go to the Rockley markets before you can eat them. Now, there are sensible reasons for this, which have to do with one choke point where all the health and safety stuff can be done. But mostly it's just a hangover from a system that's 100 years out of date, that nothing's been done to fix it. Now, the floods brought home the fact that we just can't operate our economy like this anymore, right? We really should have some sort of virtual produce exchange that allows stuff to travel from where it's going to be produced to where it's going to be consumed in a much more direct way. And we actually have the technology to do that now. We're just not applying it to the problem yet. Just the carbon footprint makes my skin crawl when I think about this. But it's just wonderful to think about how you could completely transform a basic piece of supply chain technology. And once you've done that, of course, suddenly you've empowered producers all over the country to be their own brokers, in much the same way that What If has created B&Bs all over Australia, because people can now actually market their own accommodation. You couldn't do that 10 years ago because you didn't have What If. That sort of disintermediation is going to happen in lots of things. And I think when that starts to happen, then we're going to see what Susan was talking about start to really grow. Suddenly it's not somebody in a remote community who's just thinking about fixing a hard drive. It's somebody in a remote community who's thinking about engagement in an entire business ecosystem and all the things they can do there that at the moment they simply can't do, not only because the technology is not there, but because our sort of action ecosystem isn't set up to allow them to do that kind of thing yet. And I think that's going to be absolutely brilliant. And so here we have this real opportunity as the NBN rolls out to make Queensland a leader in this. Because we could bugger about for 15 years before we really start getting our head around how to do this. And by then we'll just be copying what other people have done. We really have to get on the front foot with this as a country and as a state.
I'm just really conscious of the time.
Sorry,
Yes.
I'll shut up
Can I
now.
just make
My schedule says that in a couple of minutes I should be out in the balcony.
I'm standing
We've had
Can I
this
just make
conversation,
one
Simon.
quick comment? I think in terms of that, just a word of caution in that, yeah, look, technology is great and Indigenous communities can actually use technology for economic benefits, but I think it's just a small part of what is actually needed within these Indigenous communities to actually empower people to be able to become more sustainable. I think of the Torres Strait and my family living up in the Torres Strait where they can't actually get access to fresh fruit and vegetables and it's so expensive, the fresh fruit and vegetables that they do get. And so in a way they're actually using technology not to actually build a business, but to get the basics of to be able to survive on these islands. And I think that's, and in a way that touches on the very first question about where is technology different now to, say, 10 years ago, where my family in the Torres Strait can actually directly now get fresh fruit and vegetables and meat and all of that from Cairns, whereas before they were completely reliant on the barges that were going up to the Torres Strait, which was all very dependent on the weather. One of the other things as well I was thinking about previously in relation to that question, I mean the difference, when I was growing up in the Torres Strait, on some of these outer islands you actually only had one telephone for an entire community. And when you had kids going to boarding school down in Cairns and Townsville, to be able to communicate with family was really difficult. And with technology now, where you have mobile phones, where you can actually Skype, it's such an easier way of actually families keeping in touch. That distance has actually been bridged.
Thank you. Question up the back.
I'm Henry. I actually was thinking on the way coming here, what is this discussion about? And I was very excitedly find out that this topic is very interesting. And I heard one comment that what's the difference between the technology in 2011 and the technology 20 years ago? What's the big difference? The computer and digital communication actually underneath is quite similar, but what we are doing is completely different. And the fact widespread of social media connecting community and people, it's a new thing. And this thing, I'm thinking what we can best use of this new power and what's the uniqueness of a remote community can contribute to our society. And I have a reflection of a scenario that someone told me. People at the fringe of the society and at the remote, they have a fresh eye to look at what's going on. And what we are living every day in a metropolitan, very busy working environment, we kind of accept everything we see, we are in. And we stop challenging why it is. And we don't have that kind of fresh mind to challenge whether this is the right way to do it, the best way to do it, whether it is sensible to do it for a very long period. And people at a remote community, they have this kind of fresh eye. And especially the young people, when they can freely express their views and their perceptions, it is a unique mirror that gives us a valuable reference. That's what I...
Yeah, can I just... I heard the other day somebody said, what are we worried about, everything out there? Cities are where it is. Cities are where everything happens. Everything happens in the cities. And I thought, well, isn't that what's happening with social media? We're actually creating virtual cities. So all of these people out there in the remote areas all over the world who have access, those who have access, are actually a part of that city, and it's in this virtual social media space that everything is happening. And I think very soon we're going to have those answers, because all of these new, fresh ideas of all of these people who've been sitting on the fringe for so long are now in there, and they're happening. And it's using applications like Diva Chat and things like that is something that's really prominent or prevalent in remote communities, because it's a free social media tool. But Facebook is also free, and so it's these other free applications and the smartphones that are coming in that are actually making people go beyond their communities and joining in on the global virtual spaces. So I think that's opening up. I think it's a very big area.
There were lots of other questions in the audience, but I think we might wrap it up, because you'll have an opportunity to talk to Susan, Tom and Simon over some refreshments out on the Queensland Terrace. But before I wrap up, I just need to acknowledge some members of our audience, the Indigenous Advisory Group of the State Library of Queensland, Library Board of Queensland, the Queensland Art Gallery and Gallery of Modern Art, the Queensland Library Foundation and the Queensland Museum. And just a reminder that the Queensland Gallery is open tonight until 8 o'clock, so if you wanted to catch up with our panel before making your way over to the gallery, it's open until 8 o'clock tonight. And just because this is an event on technology, a word from our sponsors, the State Library is implementing a new event evaluation form. Oh, but it's not a form, I hear you ask. It's only fitting after our discussion that we should be using technology, so there'll be a web link up on the screen for you to fill in, and there's iPads. So the State Library staff will be walking around with iPads, and we ask you to please provide your feedback to the State Library on this event tonight. But if you're not tech savvy or prefer to fill in a hard copy form, they'll be at reception just outside the door there as well. But now I ask you to join with me in thanking Susan, Tom and Simon for their time tonight, and do join with me out in the Queensland Terrace.